Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening and welcome to The Late Show with Tim Smale. Tonight, we're going to get to grips with the ideas regarding discipline and behaviour in schools. We're going to challenge whether we're getting it right within schools and whether our approach is actually doing more harm or good for our young people. And if we could just maybe rethink our approaches to discipline, maybe we could help our young people to thrive. So in our first feature, I'm going to be talking about some of the headlines that have popped up over the last couple of weeks in our news section, Have I Got News For You? Now, parents of under fives are to be offered guidance on the amount of screen time their children should be having. And it comes on the back of government research that was published showing that 98% of children under the age of 2 were watching screens on a daily basis, with parents, teachers, and nursery staff saying youngsters were finding it harder to hold conversations or concentrate on learning. A teacher has been banned because they criticized a colleague to a parent. It's apparent that she suggested to a parent that colleagues were targeting their child. School Week reports that new complaints guidance urges parents to be respectful and use AI with caution. And there is joint guidance that's been published by the Department for Education, Parentkind, and Ofsted that introduces 5 steps to making a complaint. And it warns in particular on the use of artificial intelligence and social media as efforts to make matters worse. I do fondly look back at the days when I started as a teacher and someone would have to handwrite in a letter. And I know at this point, I am so old-fashioned. I miss those days. Ofsted holds a snap inspection of a Bristol school who've been criticised for cancelling the visit of an MP. The Ofsted snap inspection was launched following Bristol Brunel Academy's decision to cancel their visit from the Labour Friends of Israel MP, who's the vice chair. The university bosses say that degrees are no longer a guarantee for good jobs. A leading UK university vice chancellor has warned that a degree no longer guarantees a good job for graduates, citing a crowded market and the impact of artificial intelligence. Starting to notice that there's a theme with a lot of news related to education and touching on artificial intelligence. There is a cause for anxiety over AI being used by students to cheat, says exams regulators BOSS. Speaking to the House of Commons Education Select Committee, Sir Ian Balcom, the chief regulator of Ofqual, said there was a growing concern about students using AI to cheat in their coursework. There's also a lot of talk about this ban of social media for under 16s. What are your thoughts on whether this would provide a good or a bad set of outcomes for our young people? But the top teaching union is certainly urging the government on our behalf to ban social media. NASUWT said there was increasing evidence that unregulated access to social media was detrimental to children, affecting behaviour in school and harming mental health. It also said that children were being harmed by exposure to violent and sexually explicit content. And very pertinent to our theme of behaviour tonight, teachers strike at 2 Greater Manchester primary schools over a culture of violence. Teachers at 2 primary schools in Greater Manchester say they were driven to strike because of almost daily attacks by pupils, leaving parents bewildered by the industrial action. Please do comment, like, and express your views. What are your thoughts on the role being played by AI in education? Is it developing great outcomes for our young people? Are there opportunities to be explored? Or is there just a little bit of a need to slow down? What are your thoughts on behavior in the classroom? Are you noticing different trends from when you started or over previous years? Now, today's show is about challenging our ideas with discipline. And we are challenging the idea that we should rethink discipline. And we're not trying to sell a particular idea. We're not trying to say this is the only way to do things, but we are trying to spark discussion, debate, and curiosity. And joining me today is Andy Baker, whose journey into understanding human behavior began in the most challenging of circumstances. As a victim of a violent crime at just 16 years old, that experience sparked for Andy a career focused on therapeutic relationships and behavior management in both care and education. Andy is the managing director and head trainer of Able Training Support Limited. He is also the lead external trainer for the Alzheimer's Society. He's the host of the Able to Care podcast, and he serves on the board of directors for the Institute of Conflict Management. Andy is also the author of the book Targeting the Positive with Behaviors That Challenge, Empathetic Strategies for Working with Children and Adults. With training in psychology and multiple psychotherapeutic disciplines, Andy has worked in virtually every care setting imaginable, from mental health facilities and schools to children's homes, elderly care, and foster care. He's delivered lectures across the UK on topics such as dementia, trauma, autism, ADHD, behavior management, and self-care. I was delighted to talk to Andy recently, where his passion for championing good practice and behavior management across care, education, and parenting came across in spades. So, Andy, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the show. Good evening, and thank you for joining me.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
There's no expense spared on my special. So, dear listeners, today we are going to challenge some fundamental assumptions about discipline, behavior management, what it really means to help young people thrive. From behavior and mindset to teacher training, to schools doing things radically different, with maybe empathy. Andy and I are going to explore what happens when we move beyond a punishment and reward system to really rethink discipline. So, Andy, I'm going to find out a little bit more about your own journey. Like, can you tell us about your journey to become a behavior expert?
Yeah, I'm always cautious of that term expert, but specializing in this subject, I don't know half of what I'd like to know, and by the time I think I do, they'll have changed all their theories about what was right and wrong anyway. So it's a journey. I was telling you when we spoke last about I had a teacher at school. It was like my first primary school teacher who really loved me, who said that I was either going to be a scientist or an actor. And for majority of my school life, I wanted to be a zoologist. Well, technically, I wanted to be David Attenborough, like literally him. But apparently, there's not a degree in being David Attenborough. But I wanted to be a zoologist. So that was my journey. And then at 16, like things changed. So I was already a black belt in karate, and I got mugged at knife point. And that was kind of a real, my reaction to that was not one of kind of trauma and fear. It was one of, how did that happen? Because I got so much grief and shame about the fact of like, why didn't you disarm him? And you're meant to be a black belt. You should have killed him and whatever I was meant to do. So I kind of tried to understand my own reaction to that situation, to better understand, like, well, why didn't I run away? Why didn't I fight? Why did I just kind of just go along with it? Essentially, is this almost submissive behavior? And that took me down the work of a guy called Jeff Thompson, who introduced me to the idea of psychology from a very martial art point of view initially, and understanding fear. And that was my initial real passion. And I started doing an awful lot of work on myself around fear. I purposely moved towards things that scared me to test this. But I also started to get a passion for this. I worked in the pub industry, and then I got made really redundant from that. I decided to go back to university, started working in care, and studied psychology, and then went into more on psychotherapy and started to fall in love with behavior. And I moved from understanding animal behavior to understanding, well, animal behavior, I suppose, as far as just in a specific animal. So I started on that journey and just fell in love with the kind of behavior side of things. And I started teaching in-house initially, then freelancing. And I got a lot of feedback when I was freelancing You're a lot better than the last guy. And I thought, I'm not that good, so there must be some really bad trainers out there. So maybe I could do this for a company. So I started able training and doing that kind of full time, as well as other bits in the world of care. So that was kind of my journey to that point.
See, I think my career's advice, I remember in sixth form, I actually got a card from one of my law lecturers who sort of suggested maybe I should join a boy band. If there is anyone listening live or back on the podcast,
it's not too late. It's not too late, Tim.
Boys. No, they do say that. It's never too late. I'm only 26. So it's
absolutely.
So what's up? Look, you work with a wide range of kind of conditions and challenges. You know, we've kind of mentioned dementia, autism, trauma, ADHD, and there are more that I can't possibly list. But is there a particular area that you're passionate about, or that maybe you feel is most misunderstood?
My main areas of passion are the two ends of the spectrum, which is one, I do an awful lot of work around the dementia field, understanding dementia. That's one of my areas of passion, partly because there's been family members that have been affected by that, maybe that feels really personal to me, as well as there's a quality of care out there that just isn't good enough, in my opinion. Some amazing care facilities, but it's just not good enough. And on the other end of the spectrum, obviously it's, you know, being in the world of fostering and things like that, it's understanding kids. And I wish I'd had a me when I was a kid, in the fact that, you know, I struggled with my mental health a lot. I definitely, dyslexic diagnosed, but definitely some other additional differences and things like that, that I was misunderstood. I think I wasn't necessarily, you know, apart from that one teacher that loved me, but saw that difference in me as being a strength, not as a weakness, as an annoyance. So they're the two areas I find most fascinating. I suppose it's the development of our brain and then the deterioration of our brain and the complexities that go along with that define kind of everything else in the middle. Is probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah, great. So let's kind of then sort of track on to education. What do you think are the most kind of common challenges that teachers face when it comes to actually understanding children's behavior, and is there a sort of quick takeaway of what approach we might take to help it?
I think generally across the board, and this isn't just teachers, I think adults find it really hard to put themselves in the minds of children, because memories are not what we think they are. So we tend to think of memories as being almost like video camera footage of what happened in our past. But every time we lay down a memory and every time we recall a memory, we change it. So our perception of what it was like to be a child is genuinely not true. It's based on completely rose-tinted glasses or the narrative of other people kind of telling us what life was like. So I think sometimes we put our adult brain into our child body when we're looking back on our past. And so things like theory of mind, for instance, being able to put ourselves in other people's shoes. That's very hard to imagine not being able to do that as we are able to do that now. Emotional regulation. We know how well we're able to emotionally regulate, but it's very hard to put ourselves in a position when we weren't able to emotionally regulate. I suppose it's like trying to remember a time when you weren't able to tie your shoelaces. It's like almost impossible to do that because you're just like, well, I don't know. I just always have done it. I must have been a time where I couldn't, but I don't remember what it was like to be that. Yeah. So I think sometimes we put our adult brain into the brain of a child. So when we're looking at, you know, where we're perceiving their behavior, we interpret it very differently to how the child actually sees it. Like time distortion is incredible. I don't know if you've ever heard this. This is a depressing bit of information, Tim. I apologize if I'm ruining anybody's day, right? Okay. Our perception of time in the first 10 years of our life is equal to the rest of our life.
Wow, okay.
So if you remember what it was like being a child and your parents said it'll be an hour and you're like, oh, an hour? Because like, that's like a million days, right? But now it's like, I've only got an hour to get ready. And and we go, our year went so past, and you remember what some holidays felt like when you were a kid. It just felt like they went on forever. So our first 10 years of life, our perception of time is equivalent to the rest of our life.
Yeah.
Okay, that's terrifying, but that's really hard to imagine. So suddenly when we're worrying about kids, like, you know, it's give you a wonderful example of this. You'll need your coat argument, right? You'll need your coat argument, right? It's cold outside, you need your coat. I don't want my coat. So then we go, okay, fine. I know what's going to happen. And as soon as you walk out the door, oh, cold. I knew it, right? So so you get annoyed. But the thing is, this is where children's brains are different from adult brains. We know through experience, through learning, when we go outside, we're going to experience cold, and adults are much better at regulating their temperature and adjusting, you know, clothing to regulate or coping with our temperature as it is. Okay, so we can cope with the coat on inside, even though we are too hot with the coat on inside, because we know it's only a short period of time before we go outside and we'll experience the cold. Whereas a child is living in the moment. Why would I want my coat on now? I'm hot. So they go outside, now they're cold, so they want the coat. And if you think about what any child does, once they get into the car, they immediately want to take their coat off. They don't sit in the car with a coat on. Whereas we'll sit there in the journey with our coat on. But not if it's a 3-hour journey. Yeah. Then you take your coat off. If you nip into the shops, you leave your coat on. So again, from an adult point of view, we're kind of going, well, why is a child doing that? One, because they're living in the moment. So are they hot or are they cold? Their ability to regulate their body temperature is not the same. So they use clothing as a way of regulating it more than they do being able to shiver, sweat, etc. They don't have the same concept of how long they're going to be able to cope with that clothing on or off. And they don't have autonomy over whether it's going to be the shop or a 3-hour journey. They don't have that same control over it. So of course they're going to just want to put on the coat and take off the coat. So why are we having the argument? Just take the coat with you. That's it. Saves you a lot of hassle. But that's a good example of not being able to understand the problem.
I feel like you've cheated in preparation for this show. I feel like you've interviewed both of my children. You know, they have no concept of time. I have a 7 and a 3-year-old. They have no concept of time, which is a nightmare when you're jumping into the car. And also the coat argument is a pretty regular thing. I'm now just getting completely distracted with flashbacks and nightmares to my own discussions with my own children. Okay.
I get that a lot, by the way, just so you know. It's like, have you got a camera in my house? I'm afraid it's just people are more similar than we believe they are. No, I haven't, Tim. I haven't. This is the only camera I'm using.
Okay, so today we're going to be diving into Andy's thoughts on behavior, mindset, the training or lack thereof that teachers receive, schools that are pioneering empathetic approaches, and understanding the root causes of behavior, and moving beyond this concept of punishment and reward. Plus, we're going to have our regular features of lessons learned, a marking break, a shout-out board, and of course, the real pressure for Andy comes in the quick-fire quiz at the end of the show. It does put a lot of pressure on. So this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Lever up your professional development today and visit www.hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. So Andy, part 1, we're going to look at behavior and mindset. So let's start right at the beginning, Andy. Like, what do behavior and discipline really mean to you and in the work that you do?
Okay. So behavior is always overly simplified but tricky in some ways. So basically, if we just take the basic definition, which is basically an organism's response to stimulus, that is essentially behavior. So when we're looking at it from a disciplined point of view, though, behavior, we tend to fall into what we class, and we have these ideas of what is good and bad behavior. And then discipline is the set of rules that we create as far as that we're trying to teach or move towards a person to follow these particular criteria. One of the things I get people to really think about in connection with mindset, and it's something I had to do on myself as much as had to work with anybody else, is recognizing that sometimes our perceptions of what is good and bad behavior is not based on risk, it's based on values. So what I mean by that is that we tend to have these scripts that come from schemas that where, however, our models and role models, teachers, parents, whatever, basically ingrained through certain reactions, certain behavior that they did, that we get ingrained with what we think is good and what we think is bad. And then we formulate these core beliefs about ourselves based on whether we follow these schemas and how well we were able to follow these schemas. So one of the things I get, and this is a really simple example of starting point, is any time anybody recognizes they are using should and should not scripts, they must please assess that. Be self-aware enough and emotionally intelligent enough to recognize that thought, recognize it's a script, and it is not necessarily true. It's just a thought. So good children are quiet children.
Yep.
Okay. A good child should be quiet. That's a script. Okay. And anybody out there going, oh, well, no, I don't agree with that. Next time you're at a restaurant with your partner and you're having a romantic meal and there's a family next to you and two of the kids are running around and making a noise, you wonder if you don't just think to yourself, oh, I wish those parents would get control of those kids.
Yeah, please don't judge my kids.
Again, no camera in your house, Tim. But this comes from that should and shouldn't, these little scripts that were kind of then passed down to us. A good child is an obedient child. A good child doesn't answer back. So these are the schemas, and then the scripts are children shouldn't answer back.
Yeah.
So then when a child does answer back, then we're going, they're being rude, they're being bad, they're a bad child and I must correct them. And then we fall into, and you could go down things like transaction analysis, for instance, as far as we fall into parent-child script, which is I'm okay, you're not okay. I'm okay, you're obviously not okay because you're behaving like that, so I need to teach you how to be okay. We then create that parent-to-child dynamic, which means that they act like a child, whichever defensive mechanism it is that they use, whether it be just a bow to subservience or they fight or flight, whichever one it's going to be. So I think that's one of the first things I try and get people to think about is whenever they're looking at behavior, saying a child shouldn't put their finger in the plug socket, I think is okay because it's about risk. But a child should or shouldn't around other areas, it doesn't mean we're wrong, but it just means we need to recognize that that's a value structure, not necessarily, it's not a universal law that says this is good and this is bad. And I think that's where people struggle around behavior, is we could say some very simplistic examples like, murder is wrong and things like that. But we're looking at, but why? There's reasons murder is wrong. So we should always be able to give at least 3 reasons of why a behavior is challenging or wrong or whatever, which is getting back to, it's kind of the so what. So the child's doing this, well, so what? Well, if they're doing that, then so what? Well, until it gets to a point where it's impacting on other people's well-being, it's affecting their health, safety and welfare, it's actually, then that's where we're getting to the point of there's a justification. But if we can't get to that, we probably don't have a good reason.
Yeah, I guess it's something we see as a common pattern in schools. Students will face the front, they put their hands up, they need to sit facing a certain direction, etc., etc. Yeah. Are we sort of starting to confuse things like discipline with conformity or at least quiet compliance? Yeah.
There is always a challenge, and when you do things like neuro-inclusivity and things like that, really important, okay? But there is there's a balance to everything. Yeah. So when we're looking at, children being not be able to sit still, for instance, okay? If we do have a classroom and we've got a child who is shouting, being disruptive, obviously that's affecting all the learning of the other children. So there's a justification saying, well, we need to have some boundaries around this. We need to have some kind of control, because to be able to have a cohesive culture, we must have certain rules and boundaries for us to be able to interact with each other. If it's a case of a free-for-all, let everybody be who they want to be and act how they want to act, then that doesn't allow us to be cohesive. So I use the example of like with neuro-inclusivity and stuff like that. I'm very much a firm believer that, diversity is a value. It's not a negative, and we should be inclusive. And going back to old behavior management principles, which, applied behavioral analysis got a bad name because it used to try and train autistic kids to be less autistic. Well, if you go back a bit further, we used to punish left-handed people for using their left hand and force them to write with their right hand. And now we'd consider that to be barbaric. So trying to enforce an individual with autism to engage in eye contact when it causes them physical distress and pain is as evil, in my opinion. However, they are trying to cope and manage in a neurotypical world. So we might need to give them some skills, we might have to make some reasonable adjustments. We might have to give them some skills and some abilities to be able to cope in this cohesive society. So if they're going to go into work, they may have to follow certain rules and criteria. But would a good workplace be more inclusive and actually go, well, if you work better standing up, then why wouldn't you stand up? Think about how many workplaces are now being more inclusive by having standing desks and seated desks, or you can change, or you can move around if you need to, work from home if you need to. So more and more workplaces are recognizing that inclusivity, but it's finding that balance between the two: cohesive society, boundaries, but also then valuing diversity and seeing it as a strength, not a weakness, I think. Hope that answered your question. Right?
Definitely going to be a challenge, I guess, in a classroom with 30 students, right? Like and that's what's so important, I think, about sort of addressing the balance, and why it's so important to maybe challenge our discipline structures. I mean, it can't be a carte blanche, but is kind of bad behavior sometimes communication in terms of something that is just not sitting right with the student? Or are we, if we're to believe the headlines, are we facing just a bad behavior epidemic?
Most people have heard the premise that all behavior is a form of communication. And it is. That doesn't mean that we like the language. I go a little bit further. When I'm getting people to write a list of behavior they're finding challenging, I create this big list and I go, I want you to recognize that every single one of those behaviors also has a benefit. We don't tend to see the benefit. We only ever see the cost.
Yep.
But if there was no benefit, they wouldn't do it. And I get people to think about times in their life where maybe they've lost their temper and ended up saying something they regretted, or breaking something they wish they hadn't. Or maybe they were with a friend and they ended up letting a secret slip that they knew they shouldn't have told in that moment. And they might have immediately gone, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But in that moment, it must have felt like the right thing to do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. Nobody chooses to act in a way that they think is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Universal. So if we're perceiving the behavior is bad, we need to recognize they are not the villain of their own story. They perceive themselves are either justified or they're in the right, or there's a justification and reason that they are creating in their head for whatever reason of why this is the appropriate thing to do in that moment. Now, how much choice they have over that is a different matter. And that's going down. And I love the philosophical and the psychological kind of, deep dive you could go into as far as free will. But typically we're aware that only about 95% of our behavior is conscious, 95% of our behavior is subconscious, sorry, non-conscious. Yeah. Only 5% we're kind of semi-aware of. So the majority of what we do, how we act, those moments where you kind of like just did something, it was predominantly around, it wasn't a choice. It felt like a choice. Sometimes we rationalize ourselves after we've made that, our brain has made that choice, but it wasn't a conscious choice. I think one of the big things that I see in the most common behaviors that people and teachers find challenging, we could label, rather than as challenging behavior, as emotional dysregulation. And if we recognize that it's from a place of emotional dysregulation, then why wouldn't we help them to regulate rather than punish them? So I often use an analogy. The more we understand about the brain, the more we understand that some people may struggle to regulate more so than others. Not everybody's brain develops at the same route. There is numerous conditions that affect, cognitive imbalance as far as the ability to regulate emotions, to control our behavior, to behavior and emotion regulate. So we recognize it's not universal, and some people really struggle with it based on developmental age, based on neurodivergence, based on mental health, based on developmental trauma, whatever it is. Now, once upon a time, the condition of epilepsy, once upon a time, individuals with epilepsy used to be burnt at the stake as witches. Once upon a time, it used to be punishable by death because they have chosen to engage in this behavior and therefore they must be punished. We must hurt them or cause them physical harm to exorcise these demons so they no longer behave this way. Now we understand what epilepsy is. We wouldn't think in a million years about punishing for somebody having a seizure. What we might look at is what seems to trigger the seizures. Okay, well, if it's flashing lights, let's try and see what we can do to eliminate flashing lights, or put warnings or restrictions, reductions, whatever we can do. If we know that anxiety and tiredness is more likely to cause a seizure, maybe we need to help them and teach them how to recognize when they're tired or recognize when they're anxious, create reasonable adjustments if necessary, but also teach them things they can do to help them to regulate or help them to be calm. Now, if they ended up having a seizure, we might need to keep them or others safe. You know, that's still a matter of safety and well-being. But afterwards, we'd let them know that they were still unconditionally regarded. We'd empathize with them. We'd make sure they were okay and supported. There'd be no shame or blame or criticism. And isn't it a shame that we are so far behind mental and neurological health than we are physical health?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I like the numbers for mental health are just skyrocketing, right? I guess the sort of the other side of it is whose responsibility is it to teach children to self-regulate? Is that a school issue, or is that a home issue?
Both. It should always be so this is my perception, and again, you know, everything. A lot of the stuff I'm coming forward with the data, but also a lot of it is based on personal experience and opinions and things like that. So we used to be raised by the village. Yeah. We are now raised in more isolation than we ever have been before. Once upon a time, you know, we used to be able to play out in the street. And we go, oh, we don't play outside anymore. Well, we used to be allowed to do that because, you know, mum was in the house, but grandma lived next door, and we knew the next door neighbour. She was auntie, and we knew her name, and sister was just up the road, and we knew Uncle Derek over the road, and everybody was watching out for the other kids. And we had this support network, this community around us of family, because the family just lived down the road. But over time, we've become, you know, more and more independent. We travel for work. We move further away from our families and stuff like that. We don't have people living in our same households. We go and buy a new house as soon as we possibly can. You know, so we are creating this higher level of independence. And we're more connected than we ever have been before across the planet, but more disconnected with our communities and with our tribe than we ever have before. We don't know our neighbor anymore. Okay. But then we've got this child who now is, once upon a time, or if we just look at now, starting school earlier. We've got if we've got a two-parent household, potentially both parents are out working. They're then coming home and being expected to demonstrate the same level of nurturing behavior, even though they've now had a full day of work with all the stresses involved in the finances and stuff like that, making ends meet as a dual. If we've got a single parent household, then we've got an individual more than likely still having to work, but also then come home and act as both parents and role models in that, being both the high nurturing, but also high resilience kind of partners in this relationship. Still expected to demonstrate the same level of nurturing towards their children. So straight away, the impact potentially on attachment, on regulation, about all the lessons. We forget how little children now get to play, and the benefits of play as far as brain development, emotional regulation, cognitive awareness, mirror neurons as far as building empathy and stuff like that, all around play, because parents don't have time to do that and play with their kids anymore. Now it's the only time I've got is maybe 10 minutes and I come in, and then it's going to be a case of I'm going to put this electronic device in front of you. Earlier and earlier that these electronic devices are coming in, you mentioned that in the bit there, which are high adrenaline producing objects, but also dopamine inducing objects, creates this fast dopamine processing rather than slow dopamine. So they become addicted. So it's like giving crack to your kids and going, well, I only use crack for 5 minutes a day. And then we're expecting them to go to school, which is all slow dopamine. And now you're going to sit down really still and listen to me talk for an hour and a half, then transition, whatever it is, when usually I'm going, but it's much easier to do 3 seconds switch, 3 second switch, 3 second switch. Schools have got to get on board that they've got to do something different, because life for kids now is different than it was 15 years ago. 20 years ago, it's completely different. You know, the changes that COVID hit, the changes that, you know, electronics have brought in, as you mentioned, AI there and stuff like that. But we're still trying to go, well, kids need to learn. but we're setting higher and higher expectations on the outcomes that they're achieving because access to information, they're standing on the shoulder of the giants, so they're moving further and further ahead. The stuff that they're doing in maths now at ages, I was like, that was me at last year, and they're doing it in their first year of school. So higher expectations, higher level thing. But where's the nurturing? So we're at a pandemic as far as mental health with our adolescents, but schools are still going, yeah, but we need to have discipline at home. We need more nurturing in more environments. This is a counter to everything. All the thought, all the thinking was about kids build resilience through not mollycoddling, through independence. But all evidence showed when we understood attachment theory that high levels of nurturing behavior was far more likely to increase confidence than actually a reduction in it. It's counter to everything they thought that would be the case, but we don't listen. And therefore, and this is the thing, we've got to create that nurturing environment with the school. That doesn't mean non-boundaried. And I think that's one of the traps that teachers and adults generally fall into, that they sit into this dichotomous kind of thinking of either I'm strict or I'm nurturing, and which teacher am I going to be? Whereas actually, all evidence suggests that the mentor is the most effective way of teaching. It's a case of I have high standards and high expectations, but I nurture and support you to meet those expectations. And that's the best outcome. So it's a high nurturing, but also clearly boundaried, which is also what a good manager would be with any member of staff, which is also what any good parent would be with their child. All of it is good human interaction. And it doesn't matter if it's elderly, child, exactly the same principles apply.
Okay. Please do post your questions for Andy and myself. If you're catching up on podcasts, then please do reach out and do that to answer any questions. As we move towards the end of the show, we will debate, discuss, the challenge, more questions. So Andy, I just wanted to move on to sort of lessons. Has there been a mistake or a tough moment that sort of ended up teaching you something really valuable?
Sorry, could you say that again for me, Tim? The sounds a bit.
I will mime it. No, yeah, absolutely. So, what is a mistake or a tough moment that ended up teaching you something valuable?
There's been many. I think the most important, one thing that I think is always important to get over, that I am not perfect. I have made many, many mistakes. I have lost my temper. I've got frustrated. I've got irritated. What I've got better at is not managing other people, it's managing myself. Because I cannot control somebody else. The only person I should have a hope in hell of being able to control is at least myself.
Yeah.
The important thing is, if I approach that, and this is like all mental health, personal mental health, emotional intelligence, everything, it's not a matter of shaming and blaming. It's all a matter of self-empathy, but also acceptance. I was angry in that moment, and I was angry for a reason. Now let's explore what caused me to feel angry. What was going wrong for me in that moment? Why was this child's behavior, or why was this person's behavior triggering me? And it's exactly the same as a journey that I described at the start there, which was understanding how that guy mugged me and why I reacted that way. Because it wasn't a case of I can stop somebody ever trying to mug me, but I can change my reaction to it in that moment that could have changed the outcome. And it's exactly the same as that journey that I've been going on. And it isn't a straight journey like any journey from not knowing to knowing. It is steeped with frustration, mistakes, and messes. But I think that's where, it's a prime example, right? There I am working with a kid who's experienced domestic abuse. And I knew that raising my voice to him was not the right thing. But in that moment, I was angry. He was pushing, he was goading me. He was pushing me. And I ended up raising my voice. Walking away from that, because my partner at the time, we switched, and she said, go and cool off. And I had to self-reflect on that. And I had to think about why. Why did that wind me up like that? And the answer that I came to is, if I'd have spoken to my dad in the way that kid had just spoken to me, my dad would have reacted to me just like I did to him. That doesn't make my dad a bad person, but it also doesn't mean he was right. And it's that Go on, sorry, go on, carry on.
No, sorry, please.
I was just going to say, it's the self-reflection. That's the important bit that people sometimes miss out on. That I have to be vulnerable enough to recognize I'm not perfect. I think that's where self-esteem is so important, in developing that self-esteem, both for the child needs self-esteem to be able to recognize that making a mistake doesn't mean you're useless. And that's exactly the same as what the adult needs to be able to do as well. That maybe I contributed towards this escalation. Maybe I contributed towards the behavior. And if I can't recognize that, that means my self-esteem isn't good enough, because I should be able to recognize there'll be things that I did right, but there'll be also things that I might be able to do better next time. And it's not about being perfect today. A good manager, I use that comparison a lot, is somebody who's just striving to be better tomorrow. And that's where the mistakes I've made. I watched a billionaire talk fairly recently, and his mum had given him the best advice that I wish I'd known younger. So he was a multi-billionaire now, talking about his journey in life. And he said, my mum gave me the best bit of advice, which was fail as fast as you can and as many times as you can. And that was the advice that she'd given him. And I think so many more of us could benefit from exactly that empathy towards other people and their mistakes and failures, but also self-empathy towards our mistakes and failures. And I think that's the hard lessons that I've had to learn. And I've experienced difficulty in mental health and burnout and all kind of challenges. You know, I haven't had a smooth ride. This has been a challenge, but it's just one that I've kept going back to, so I need to be, it doesn't mean I'm not good enough. It's just, I need to be better tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into part two, and just starting to think about sort of your views on how teachers are trained when it comes down to behavior and discipline. Do you think that current teacher training is adequate, or do you feel there's maybe anything that's particularly surprising or anything that's missing in that training?
There is so much missing. I think teachers are absolutely amazing. I think what they do is absolutely amazing. I think, you know, and that's not just lip service. When I was at school, the one job I never would have wanted to do is be a teacher, because all the kids were horrendous. So I just thought, that looks an awful thing to do. So I have this huge admiration for anybody who would put themselves in a room with 30 kids and go, okay, let's do this. You know, I teach him, I do lectures in front of thousands of people. That's not as scary as a room full of 30 teenagers. As far as, I think, yeah, so I'm trying to think what your original question was. I went off on one again. As far as teacher concerned, teacher training. Sorry, there we go. I think teachers have done a disservice, and not just because it's what they should know how to manage behaviour and stuff like that, because that's where an awful lot of pressure is put on them. You should know how to manage behaviour. You should be able to manage your classroom. The big thing is, like, there isn't enough emphasis on those scripts of things like self-care and putting yourself first and how to emotionally cope with being on stage for an entire day. You know, it's tiring, it's hard work. It does require, and I know so many teachers, you know, obviously my partner is a former teacher, was a lead, part of a lead team, now a Senko consultant. So, you know, we've had these conversations a lot, and, you know, I know that she hasn't only worked the hours that she's been paid to work, and doing an awful lot more. And I think there is so many skills that teachers, that nobody is taught about their own kind of well-being and management. And again, overcoming the scripts of a good person puts others ahead of themselves. No, a good person puts themselves first, because a good person needs to be okay to be able to then make sure everybody else is okay. But these aren't things that are kind of supported. They're not supported. I'm sure many people watching have heard the term trauma informed, but far too many schools think that trauma informed is, we did a half day on the inset about trauma, so now we're trauma informed. No, trauma informed is, what are the organization doing to ensure the well-being of the staff? Because working with traumatized kids is traumatizing. If I'm working with individuals who are in a constant state of dysregulation, potential fight, flight, freeze or fawn, they are trying to draw me into that same emotional state. And if I have any level of empathy, I'm going to end up being drawn into that, which means I'm going to end up with burnout, compassion fatigue, and all of those elements. So I think training, there's so much more that teachers could benefit from understanding around neurodiversity, around mental health, around understanding behavior. But there is also so much more that teachers should be able to be supported in, as far as how to self-regulate, how to manage self-care, how to find those opportunities to be able to cope with the difficult behaviors. Because as I said, I can't control other people as much as I control myself. But and here's one of the tips I've said: like, calm is as contagious as fear and panic. Okay, so if a kid's dysregulated, because they're dysregulated, that's going to trigger my nervous system into also being dysregulated, because that child is communicating to me that things are not safe, and therefore, as a human, as a social animal, I'm going to pick up on those cues and go, "Oh, things aren't safe." But this is where I really need to be. If you think of it like a parent, I need to communicate that actually everything's okay. Everything's safe. I am no harm to you. There is no threat to you. You are safe right now. So you don't need to be in that dysregulated state. That's what we've got to communicate. And I use the example of, like, have you ever seen a dog owner walking with their dog and they see another dog coming towards them? And this dog owner then pulls their dog really close in and goes, "Okay, boy, it's okay." And you can see the kind of the anxiety in the owner's face as this other dog is coming towards them. And they're so worried, "I don't want them attacking my dog and I don't want them fighting." But what are they actually increasing the likelihood? They're actually increasing the likelihood of them fighting, because they're communicating to the dog, "You're not safe." So straight away, how important is it for teachers to be able to self-regulate before we start then looking to manage the behaviors of other kids?
It's pushing over 20 years. I don't think I've ever had a CPD session or training in behavior management. And what you do find as a teacher is that you become better and better and better at juggling the different kind of activities we play, because we are playing different roles in the classroom, from workers to youth workers to SEND specialists, through to teachers, through to developing relations, through to safeguarding. It's such a complicated place, and quite often you do it without necessarily feeling like you're being equipped with the tools that you need. It's sort of, I go in this kind of direction and this kind of direction. It kind of goes back to, again, with let's talk about dog owners. We're not likening young people to dogs, please. Ultimately, the amount of people who are trained because they go to puppy school and go through that process are probably a lot more reassuring with the dog as it's exposed to other dogs and other environments than those who maybe are sort of making it up as they go along. One thing that's sort of mentioned by Paul Foz just in the comments here, he's saying that he'd actually really like to nurture much more, but the pressures of having an overloaded curriculum and school day means that you end up having this environment that's conducive to watch, listen, complete, but not necessarily nurture. And so his question is, logistically, are there ways around that? Are there ways to manufacture into a busy day the opportunity to nurture?
I think yes is the short answer. I genuinely think there is. I think sometimes there's all about narratives, and when you understand mindset, and this is why I do so much mindset-led stuff. There's a principle in neuro-linguistical programming, which you changing your language, change your perception. Okay, and I'm not a huge advocate for NLP, but there's some good bits in it. So if I'm talking about if I change my language from "I don't have time" to "how can I find time," there is a difference in my language completely changing my perception of the day. Because if I go I don't have time, I'll notice all the time I don't have. If I shift my question over to how can I find the time, then I'm going to be looking for opportunities. We're going, actually, if I didn't bother doing that, that's a bit of doesn't actually gain any benefits, that bit there. So could I put something more worthwhile into it? If everybody's narrating on how busy they are, guess what everybody notices? Yep. How busy they are. Yeah. So it becomes a narrative. It becomes the culture. It becomes, and this isn't to be derogatory. This is understanding the nature of human beings. When I buy a new car, suddenly I start noticing the same make and model on the road all over the place.
Always. Yep.
I don't think I'm an influencer. I don't think so many people go, "Hey, check out what Andy's driving." I'm buying the same car, right? Those cars have always been there. I'm just noticing them because now I've created an availability bias. I've pre-programmed my reticular formation that's what I'm going to notice. So if I'm talking all the time how busy I am, guess what I notice how busy I am. Now, as far as then including things, I think there's also the perception that we think in black and white kind of ways. Far too many people, let's say, go, I'd love to go to the gym, but I don't have time, which means they do no exercise rather than doing 10 push-ups.
Yeah.
Because I think I either go to the gym for an hour or there's no point in doing fitness. I either have an hour to be able to do self-care or I can't do self-care. And I think you could create incredibly nurturing opportunities, an opportunity for self-care for yourself. Like, let me give you an example. I gave a bit of a task for a parent who was struggling with her emotional well-being. She has children with special education needs, was in a bit of burnout, really struggling. She's at work, having to get home. And I sort of said, right, we looked at her route home and I said, you're going to take this route home from now on. It's a slightly longer route. And it was exactly about 3 minutes, as for recording a sat nav, 3 minutes extra to get home. But what we put in place is in that 3 minutes to get home, said when you get to that point, you're going to put on a song that makes you happy, your favorite song. And you could have a couple, but the one that if it comes on the radio, you're like, oh, my tune. Something that feels invigorating, something that that produces slow dopamine, that produces this well-being. And you're going to put that song on and listen to that for the rest of the journey home on that extra 3 minutes. Now, she resisted this because she was like, but I need to get home. The kids are going to be there. But how often have you been 3 minutes late because the roadworks have been there, or the traffic's been really bad, or you've had to take a longer route because something had happened, or you'll get kept late at work by 3 minutes? Why are you waiting for the universe to give you those 3 minutes rather than taking them back yourself? Because all it is permission. Yeah. So I think sometimes there's teachers that are caught in this trap of like, I don't have permission to do nurturing and self-care because I've got to fulfill this criteria, this curriculum, meet these outcomes. So it's a case of, so I either do that or I do this. And instead it's trying to shift into where going like, how could I do that? Even if it's, could we demonstrate? I mean, I know it's a bit cliched, but some of the videos of when teachers are entering the classroom, for instance, I saw one the other day where the kids would tap on a thing of either a hug or a handshake or a high five or a dance or like that. Yep. That's as they were walking into the classroom. Now, I know that's very primary school based. You may not do that with a secondary school, but I saw it with a secondary school where a teacher had an individualized handshake for every child that came through that door. And each of those kids, he'd learned this specific, some were just a fist bump, some were like a almost a dance routine. But he had this individualized handshake. Now, the kids are going to come into the class anyway. You've got to kind of wait until they come into the class anyway. So is that a potential opportunity for nurturing and connection? Mm-hmm. And to demonstrate the value of this, maybe this would be worthwhile. And I'm hoping I'm not talking too much, Tim. Do tell me, you'll have to. There was a study that was done that took a school where the children were particularly challenging, and they did a survey on the teachers, and they asked the teachers to name the child that they found most challenging. And they set these teachers a task, which was called 2 minutes for 10 days. And for 10 days, 5 days 1 week, 5 days the next week, the teachers had to engage with that child that they found most challenging for 2 minutes. Not about work, not about telling them what to do, just purely about engagement, about getting to know them, asking them questions, being interested in them. What they found at the end of those 10 days is that the behavior of the kids had already started to improve significantly in those particular classes. And when the kids were interviewed, like, you seem to be getting on a little bit better in such and such a class, I'm going to use their language, a case of, yeah, well, he actually seems to give a shit about me. Not only did it impact on the kids, it significantly impacted on the teachers. Because by the end of those 2 weeks, the teachers who described those children as some of the most challenging children were going, they're actually kind of my favorite. I've completely changed my perspective on them. Sometimes when he puts his head on the desk, I thought he was just being rude. I didn't realize that actually his parents are both disabled and he's having to get up really early in the morning to sort his little brother out, to get his breakfast, get him cooked, and help his parents get ready in the morning before he's able to get to school. So sometimes he's a bit tired. I never knew that. And that's where motto, connection before correction.
Yeah, it's you know, I've always described myself as a sort of relationship practitioner, and you know, it is finding times for those opportunities to talk about a football team, to remember something happened with their little brother, to remember that they were off sick last week and just ask and check in how they're doing. I've always felt that's helped with me being able to convey a message of nurturing within the classroom. And I would say that I can get lessons wrong. I can get kind of content not quite pitched at the right level, but I'd say that the students usually buy into it because we have the relationship there. I think that the education strategies that I utilize in the classroom work more often than they don't because of my relationship rather than because I'm necessarily doing something that's really innovative. Okay, so look, post your questions. Please keep them coming in. We've got some fantastic questions coming in. I'll catch up on the comments board in a minute. But as we kind of go towards the end of the show, we'll continue to debate, discuss, challenge, and question your thoughts. So now is an opportunity for our shout out board. I have a shout out for Nick Emsley, and the shout out is the time and moment is that Nick is our head of boarding and head of boarding house. His pastoral is extraordinary. It goes far beyond what is expected, offering sustained, meaningful mentoring and guidance to students with very serious personal challenges. It is genuinely my opinion that Nick, had Nick not done what he did, particularly last year, some young people who are now at university and thriving would not be with us. Alongside Nick is an exceptional physics teacher. He creates a real sense of wonder around the subject. He runs outstanding enrichment, including astronomy, and gives huge amounts of time supporting and mentoring students and colleagues. His impact on young people, especially those who might not otherwise see physics or science as for them, is transformative. So Nick Emsley, thank you so much for all you're doing. I'd like to do a personal shout out to someone I haven't met, but who was very, very kind in sending me across their master's dissertation on developing like meaningful and impactful school reward system. That's Owen Kerr. I just think it's so cool that you can meet people online and they are so willing to share expertise and good practice, knowledge and research. And you know, that's just an amazing thing. So thank you so much, Owen. So Andy, the pressure's back onto you. It's talking about schools that maybe are doing things just a little bit differently. Are there kind of role model schools out there where school leaders, school communities are doing things differently? And if so, what is it that they're doing?
So do you mind if I just address, so there's a comment that somebody's put in. So there's a, and I just thought it worthwhile that I think this is one of the challenges. So Huma has put in there about if effective boundaries, management, routing clear boundaries, consistency and stuff like that. Yeah. Nothing they've said I disagree with, apart from the difference between what they're saying as far as consistency and respect and therapeutic approaches. I think that's where there's a real common misunderstanding around that therapeutic approaches and trauma-informed practice and even gentle parenting has been misrepresented, which is a case of it's kind of letting kids do whatever they want to do. And absolutely not. So I'm going to address something really important that anybody out there should be aware of. Do kids like boundaries? And the answer is universally, yes, they do. Even though they don't seem to. They need boundaries and they actually thrive in boundaries 100%. Okay. And the best analogy I heard from this, because it was from a foster parent who told me about this, said, use an example of like getting on a roller coaster. And everybody gets on a roller coaster, everybody pulls the harness down over their shoulders. And if you watch everybody, all of them will go push that harness as hard as they possibly can. So does that mean they don't like the harness? Or actually they just got to test whether it's reliable or not? Yeah, they've got to check whether it's safe. I worked in mental health as far as then things like personality disorders. And the problem is that they will do lots to try and control and manipulate boundaries because it helps them to feel in control. And that's really important to understand as far as control helps you to feel safe, but it doesn't make you happy. So control, if I'm in control, it makes me feel like why do most of us prefer, if we're in a icy road, we'd rather we drove than somebody else because we trust ourselves more than we trust anybody else. So if we trusted the driver as much as like 100%, we'd be fine somebody else driving. So that control helps us to feel safe. If we 100% trust the driver, we feel okay, which is why the opposite to anxiety is not calm, it's trust. So trust is really important, and boundaries demonstrate consistency, that I am trustworthy. I don't trust people I can manipulate because they're not reliable. So actually then in mental health, they manipulate the boundaries, show that person's not trustworthy, so it actually damages the relationship, and it's self-fulfilling prophecy, it causes them further harm. The same with kids, they need the boundaries, but why can't we be empathic the fact that they're struggling with boundaries? So I can set a rule, and the example I often use is around electronics, right? I think using electronics requires a certain level of maturity. So let's say I'm having a conversation with a kid going, we need to demonstrate that maturity is there to be safe on electronics. Now, sometimes when I ask you to come off, you try and ignore me, or you get irritated and you don't come off within the time. And that tells me maybe that maturity isn't there, because we need to be able to manage our time properly and things like that with what we're doing. So we're going to set a rule and a boundary here that, I understand you need to save a game. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and that allows you to save, and I'll, set a timer to help you. At the end of those 5 minutes, you need to have come off. If you haven't come off, then obviously that boundary isn't there necessarily. And therefore, maybe that maturity isn't there. So we then set them up, and we kind of go, okay, you got 5 minutes, set them up to succeed, not set them up to fail. And maybe they mess it up. They go, no, okay, understand the rule then. So that's no more electronics for the rest of the day. Now, how is that kid going to react in that situation? They're not going to go, oh, thanks. They're going to escalate. And why? Because they're going into fight or flight. Their amygdala's telling them there's danger here because you've got a lack of control. No, and this isn't abnormal. This isn't adults struggle with this. They've just got better ability to emotionally regulate. So we're going to go, now what typically adults do is, well, I warned you, you made your choice. Congratulations for shaming them for making a mistake. This is where, again, other people in the comments, understand principles of growth mindset and understand that we can still develop a case of it's okay to make mistakes. It's what we do with those mistakes that make a difference. So we can then communicate that going, hey, I get this is really hard. Maybe you feel like that wasn't the right choice and you're feeling frustrated. I get it. We'll try again tomorrow. I haven't given an electronic back. I haven't changed my no into a yes. I haven't backed down on myself. But why do I need to shout? Why do I need to belittle them? Why do I need to shame them? My boundaries can be absolutely firm. Boundaries should not be barriers. They're boundaries. But I can still be empathic. But people just it's two sides of the same coin. And just go, oh, you're either empathic or you're therapeutic or you're disciplined. No, you're boundaried with empathy. So hopefully I just wanted to address that, because I think it's a common misconception. And there's teachers out there doing therapeutic practice that do it wrong because they're not being boundaried. They're people pleasing sometimes, which isn't a positive either. So so sorry, I went off there on a tangent. But
yeah, not at all. It's just, I'm also a big believer in terms of this idea of someone coming back in the next day. I think it was put sort of pretty eloquently, and probably better than I would do by a primary school kind of vision, which was, every single day a child deserves a second chance. And it's this idea that as teachers, sometimes I feel that we dictate what's going to happen in our classroom. And when we take those sort of biases in, this is the child that we don't like, this is the difficult one, we will treat them in such a way that also makes them play out that particular character. I don't think it's as simple as that in terms of all cases when we look at their headlines and we look at the research on behavior. But I also do think that contributes some way, and that we sort of manage these expectations, and we, by accident, treat people in a certain way that is defined by our own prejudice. This child is going to be difficult. This class is going to be difficult. I hate teaching this particular class. And invariably, they become the difficult children and the difficult classes to teach. So there is some sort of dictation on that as well, I wonder. But the question I was kind of thinking is, are there schools out there that are doing it differently? Or are we sort of fixed in schools in terms of this rewards, sanctions kind of method, and that's pretty standard?
We are a little bit. So the two best things, there's three really good examples, but two, there's a guy called Roger Mitchell, who's actually been on my podcast. He runs a school, Ripple Primary School down in London, which is one of a significantly deprived area of London. I think in the podcast we had, I think he has 77 different languages within his school, but his is predominantly relational based school. So it is firm boundaries, but it's also then incredibly relational. Everything's viewed not from a punishment or reward. It's more about how does it impact on our community, on our society. We are social creatures, and therefore there's a natural instinct for cohesion. You know, look at social learning models, look at the principles as far as, you know, even the Bobo clown study, which some people have heard of, where, you know, children witness an adult being violent and they mimic, or the studies where people get in a lift and all of the people in the study are with actors, and all of the actors face the back of the lift. And by the top floor, the subject of the experiment universally have all slowly turned themselves round, looking at the back wall in a lift, which is not typical behavior. So there's some wonderful examples of that. So there is some really good schools. Fiona Booth from St. Nicholas in Boston, she does it very, very therapeutically, very relational based and stuff. So I've met some amazing teachers. Secondary schools, I'm lacking in data personally, as far as secondary schools that are applying this. There is some that's starting to come through, especially a lot of the special education needs schools and stuff like that. But I'm afraid it feels, and it is feels, I don't have the data to back it up, but it feels like they're the two furthest behind are prisons and secondary schools when it comes to understanding behavior and discipline.
Yeah,
that's how it feels. So I think there is this kind of preconceived ideas of what a teenager should and shouldn't be able to do and things like that. Like with you gave the quote there as far as all children should be justified to make a mistake. Sorry, can you just repeat that quote again for me that you said?
Yeah, for me, it's that every day a child deserves a second chance. You know, we should always be able to offer that second chance, no matter who they are, what mistakes they've made.
And this is, again, where there's potentially then a script, which is, well, they've had 2 chances, they've had 3 chances, they've had 4 chances, they've had 5 chances. Working with, so again, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a condition that I've had quite a lot of experience in my life. I understand quite a lot about the condition. And children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder do not learn from cause and effect thinking. So they all, like the star that you give them on the Monday for the good behavior, won't change what they do on the Tuesday. They won't enjoy the detention you give them on the Tuesday for what they did on the Monday, but it won't change what they do on future Mondays. Yeah. They do not learn in that way. And you can't, when you're working with children with FASD, go, well, they should learn by now. Because who are you to dictate how long it should take you to learn something? Because based on scripts going, well, I've warned you 3 times, now you should know. Well, okay, well, if I took 100 people and gave them all like 3 balls and said, right, learn to juggle, some of them would learn quicker than others, and it wouldn't be down to me to dictate. And if I'm finding that certain individuals don't seem to be learning it very well, maybe I need to explore how I'm teaching it rather than how they're learning. So that's when we're looking at, just want to be careful as far as, again, that script of how many times we warn them. Again, doesn't mean that there isn't consequences. Exactly as I gave the example with electronics, consequences and boundaries, absolutely. But the consequences may be natural. The consequences should be, I use an acronym called SURF, which is short, immediate, relevant, and then forgotten. And I don't mean forgotten by them, but forgotten by others. We don't keep bringing it up. Now, remember what happened last time. Yeah. Now, just to continue on, I think I saw in one of the things you mentioned over, or one of your comments, that somebody had made, we're preparing kids for the real world. There's a lot of the information that I've managed to get and add into what my study is, again, is not just from the 2 ends of the spectrum, being kind of, dementia as well as children, and understand the spectrum of human beings. I've also done a lot. I'm a businessman. I own 5 different businesses, and I read an awful lot around business psychology, because you know who invests an awful lot of money in understanding human behavior? Corporations. Okay, because there's a lot of money. So there's Alfie Kohn wrote a book called Rewards as Punishment, which is exploring, which is a book for children. But then you've got why motivating people doesn't work and what does. Even organizations are now starting to recognize that punishment reward is nowhere near as effective as other factors. There's a book called Good to Great, which looks at greatest companies that there has ever been. And they find quite often in the greatest company been, they don't pay more. It's about the relational nature of the environment. Working with other highly competent people is what really drives. And we are so focused on extrinsic motivators that we must use punishment rewards to motivate people. But actually, that's not sustainable. Wonderful example of this study. I read some research. Which do you think is more effective for changing people's behavior when it comes to speeding offences? Fines and points or speed awareness courses? So is teaching more effective, or are fines and punishment more effective? And universally, speed awareness courses have significantly improved reducing the likelihood of reoffending than punishments, fines, and sanctions ever will be.
Yeah,
we're just archaic. We're not willing to accept the data yet, because the narrative of behaviorism has dominated psychology for that long that it's ingrained in our narrative. And foster and adoption started to change it. Primary schools started to change it, and it's seeping through the system, slowly pushing out across the different age groups, in my opinion.
Interesting. I mean, because one thing you sort of touched upon is that, you know, when we reflect on it, that maybe some of the behavioral issues are caused by like what we're doing in the classroom and how we're teaching, which is probably one of those sort of debates that's quite often had in education and between practitioners, in terms of those who are sort of traditionalists and those who are progressive in terms of their thinking and the way they want to challenge ideas. But does that mean that because I feel like teaching has gotten better, right? Certainly since I started my career, certainly since I was at school, like teaching has become so much better. There is so much more understanding about what makes a complete classroom. But at the same time, we are seeing ever increasing difficulties with behavior. And some of the statistics are sort of really mind-blowing. So I think the NAS UWT was saying that 95% of teachers experience rudeness from pupils. 62% experience stress from pupil aggression. And that leaves 52% of teachers wanting to quit the profession. So we're seeing teaching is getting better, but we're seeing more behavioral problems. Like, what is the connection there? Is it down to what we're doing in the classroom, or are there other social ills that are sort of causing an epidemic with behavior?
I think there is always been, and again, are we better at data, and therefore sometimes, we're reporting more of the incidents than we ever had before. Maybe they were always there a little bit. I remember a class at my school that one time turned all the furniture upside down in the French room because they thought it was funny. So my classmates did horrific things to teachers, and I was at a grammar school. And so I remember it as being horrible and being rude. Maybe not to the same level, maybe it's not the same level of violence and stuff like that. So maybe there is a difference, but obviously we have access to more information than we ever have, but we've also got a cognitive bias towards a negative and things like that. So obviously there is data that kind of backs what you're saying up 100%. So maybe it is worse. I do always think one of my favorite quotes, and there's controversy whether this is a genuine quote, but it basically says, what is it with the youth of the day? They do not listen to their elders. They're running riot in the street with wild notions. What's to become of our future? And that's quoted as being from Plato, 454 BC.
Yeah, yeah.
So the ancient Greeks were going, teenagers are pricks, aren't they? It's not particularly a surprise. And we're still going, they still are.
Yeah.
But I think, and I always say with teenagers, that, we hear about statistics of them selfish and damaging and violence and stuff like that. But then there's the flip side, Rosa Parks, what age was she? Greta Thunberg, whether you like her or hate her, what age was she? Charles Darwin was only 22 when he went on the Beagle. And most major scientific discoveries are made in your early 30s, which means that they were then studying the science in their mid-20s. So adolescence they are the pioneers and the pirates, but they only get remembered for one. Okay. So I think there is a slight cognitive bias in there. I think the social stressors, and kids are expected to grow up faster than they ever have before, but also expected not to be grown up at the same time. There's this weird narrative of going, right, you're not an adult till you're 18. You've got to stay in school until you're 18. We used to be married and be able to leaving home at 16 and working. My mum left at 15 and went into work. But then So we're expecting them to be younger, but at the same time, but grow up and be mature. And there's this real weirdness around how we're approaching childhood generally that I don't think most of us adults really understand. Children have more access to information than any adult probably does. They can find it faster at their fingertips. So me as a teacher at the front going, well, this is right, this is wrong. Wait a minute, let me just ask ChatGPT. You don't seem to be right because I've got the details here and the references to prove that you're wrong. But I'm still trying to go, well, adults know best.
Yeah.
So it's not, we're not adapting and we're struggling, I think, to really know how to navigate this. The other thing is, again, COVID impacted massively around children. You know, I've got 2 girls in my household. Both have been significantly impacted by it. The older of the 2 couldn't cope with school. COVID changed her behavior completely as far as it created this bubble. And she loved being at home and having no routine. And if she wanted to go to the toilet, she'd just go to the toilet. And she didn't have to get out. Her bubble shrank down into nothingness. But then she was just told, right, step outside your bubble now, with no kind of understanding. I know, you know, adults found it massively hard as well, but then, right, start socializing again, start sitting in a classroom of 30 people again, start engaging in work again at the routine that we tell you to, lose all your autonomy, lose all your choices. And then we're wondering why we're triggering fight or flight responses. Because we've just, absolutely, we are like goldfish. We only grow as big as our tank. Apparently that's a myth. But our tank is more, it's like inflatable. If it's not growing, it tends to shrink. And that's what everybody's bubble shrank down. And then we expected them just to expand. But we didn't expand it based on, hey, what can you cope with? We expanded it on what we've decided you can cope with. And I have to say, with boundaries and expectations, and I know we may feel, you know, it's been 5 years now since COVID. But the key developmental period that some of the children who are acting out, that, you know, as we've already said, 90% of your brain is fully developed by the age of 5. Your brain reaches full maturation at 25. So you've got this significantly area of plasticity. The adolescent period where the brain is completely rewiring itself as far as getting rid of old pathways that are no longer necessary and laying down ones that are required for adulthood. But the kids who were going through that were sat in a house watching a screen with a limited kind of social connection. So yeah, I wonder why we're struggling to understand their behavior. I think they're struggling to understand their behavior. Yeah, I don't think they get it, you know. And I do get it from teachers' point of view. I genuinely do. I'm trying my best to help.
It's a frustration, isn't it, for teachers and for schools? But you know, I also think it's one of those really tricky issues because, you know, it's such a high profile thing in the media, and again that helps to reposit us towards the negative. You know, at the same time, if we look at just before COVID in autumn 2019, there's something like 174,000 suspensions, and then you look at after that, and we're well over 300,000 suspensions in just the autumn term. I think it's something like 334 for this academic year, just in the autumn term. So there's definitely something has been shifting, something has changed. And you know, is there a correlation with now that we're sort of either going in 2 directions? One, we've become more reliant on our screens and on our devices because COVID kind of forced us to sort of, as schools say, right, more's going online, more's being stored online, access to lessons on this way, you're going to use your iPads, you're going to use your computers. Or is it because in a weird sort of roundabout way, because of COVID and because you were at home and because you then tended to be in more of a family bubble, you experience more of the nurture. And then when you had to leave that to then re-enter the way that we do school now, where there is so much academic pressure, there are so many exams coming on, there is such a busy day, that it's sort of changed the dynamic and people's attitude towards, well, I'm not getting what I need.
You kind of nailed it. You said a little bit, and I don't think this is the only factor, and I think it's incredibly complex. You know, this is, you know, the human brain is the most complex structure in the known universe, and you know, with over 100 billion individual neurons interconnecting with roughly between 100 and 1,000 synapses to other, it's so complex. It's like a weather system. And I've been studying psychology for 20 years. I consider myself to be a fairly mediocre weatherman, so I can roughly know whether it's going to rain or shine, but I still got caught in a thunderstorm in my shorts. So I'm still going to get it massively wrong. So I think there's so many contributing factors, biological, psychological, environmental factors that have conditioned, and it's not just now, it's also historic, that have all impacted on this. But if we just take something simple there, like, as you said, an increase in suspensions. Being at home's really nice. Being at school's really hard. If I act out, they send me home.
Yeah.
So why it's a reinforcement, it's not a punishment. So the time's it being, because once upon a time, but I want to see my friends. I can chat to my friends at home. I've got more access to my friends at home than I actually do at school, because I could talk to them freely in the evenings, and you don't let me talk to them during the day.
Yep.
So actually it is more advantageous. So there's a reward to it. So yeah, I think, and that's one factor. I think, school anxiety is huge. Teachers have said to me, once upon a time, managing kids was always been hard, but they used to at least be in the classroom. Now they're not even in the classroom. They're all over the place in school. I think I shared a post recently, which was 2 schools' approaches to something. One of the school that we removed both of the kids in our household out of, put things in place as far as you weren't allowed to go to the toilet. We had to fight to get them a toilet pass, because one of them was actually so anxious about going to the toilet that she'd actually started to restrict her eating and fluid consumption, because she was so anxious about being able to go to the toilet and not being allowed to. So we fought to get this toilet card, but then they found that the kids were manipulating the toilet card. So then what you had to do is you had to show your toileting pass, and then they had to wait for a member of the pastoral team to come along and escort the child to the toilet, where they'd stand outside while the child went to the toilet and escort them back to the class. I've tried to put this in place at work, and I've found that, because obviously we need to make sure that kids are being supported in what it's like in the real world. So I'm trying to make the real world look a bit more like a school does. So now I've restricted my staff so they can only go to the toilet when I tell them it's okay to. And I stand outside the door to make sure they come back to work quickly. And obviously I haven't done that, Tim. No.
I'm thinking about it, though. Yeah.
But there's another school who had on the backs of the doors of the toilets, which is a case of, we know sometimes that the bathroom can feel like the only safe place to hide when you're feeling overwhelmed. We want you to know that we're here for you and we want to support you. And if you ever need help, you only just need to contact this person. Here's a QR code and stuff like that. Because we'd rather you were in somewhere nice and somewhere safe just to be able to feel that you were okay, rather than having to lock yourself away in a bathroom. So one is looking at we need to stop them doing that. And the other is to go, let's understand why they're doing that. And let's see if we can give them an alternative to doing that. So this is the thing, as far as when we're looking at, what's the solution. First off, we need to understand why the behavior is occurring. And then we need to look at, so what can we do? Either can we eliminate the stress? Can we meet the need? Or what strategies do we need to teach them to be able to do it themselves? And we need to kind of go to the basics. Like, I was working with a girl who used to have panic attacks, and the school had kind of said, well, she needs to sort of be in class and she needs to learn. I said, but she can't. I mean, she's in an anxiety attack. It's pointless. She's not learning anything. So our first step is to help her to regulate. Then we can teach. Teaching doesn't come when a person's in anxiety. You're wasting your time. So safety first, then teaching, but it may take time. So what we instigated, and they tried putting, we've given her so she's allowed to go to this quiet place to regulate herself outside the classroom. So she just needs to come and let the teacher know that she needs to go out there. I said, no. If you're about to have a panic attack, going up to the desk and waiting in a queue of other kids potentially, and going up to the teacher in front of everybody going, I'm about to have a panic attack. Can I go to my quiet space now, please?
Yeah.
I can't verbalize when I'm in an anxiety state. So we gave her a card that she could show to the teacher. The teacher knew that then 10 minutes, okay, they'd go and check on her, and then they'd encourage her and help her and bring her back. That was step one. That's not the end of the journey. That's just letting her know that she has the autonomy and teaching her the skill that if she needs to regulate, here's a safe place to do it. Then we can start looking at, right, let's see if we can build up her resilience here to be able to cope. So then we can go, okay, when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're noticing those early signs, we're going to do like a minute of, like, you can doodle in your doodle book, right? Do that for a minute. And if that helps you to calm, go back to carry on with the lesson. If you can't cope, if you have to leave, okay. But then she could be rewarded for the minute of the doodle. Hey, well done for that. That was fantastic. I noticed you did that and you managed to stay in class. You managed to do all of that. Now, if she went, there was no punishment, no shame. It was just, hey, you're doing great. Little win. You stayed in for a minute longer than you have yesterday. That's fantastic. You're doing amazing. Let's do a little bit more. Let's do 2 minutes. Let's do 3 minutes. Let's do 4 minutes. Let's see if we can get so you can spend a whole time in a class. But sometimes it's about giving them that out to give them the confidence that they have some autonomy. They can escape. They trust the teachers. They trust the environment. They trust that they can cope before we then start putting in the teaching.
Yeah.
We've got to look at, again, safety first. So I have a 6 C's in my system, which is where we look at comfort, consistency, connection, choice, competency, and then challenge. And it's working through this, a bit like Maslow's hierarchy. So we build on each step. Because for me to be able to be challenged, I need to feel comfortable enough that making a mistake is okay. If I can't do this, it's all right. I'm still in a safe place and stuff. So.
Okay, so Andy, I'm really sorry because we're so close to the end of the show, and I've skipped out, and you know, like Huma again has posted on X and he said, "What is the solution?" And I feel like for us that there's probably got to be a part 2. But look, I'm not going to put you on the thing, but I'd love to explore this more because, yeah, I feel like we're getting to the bones in terms of what we can do to empower. Like ourselves within the classroom, because the difficulty is, you know, when you look at the layers of support that go in there, is that, you know, we are in you know, sort of seeing reductions in budgets, reductions in staff, less and less in the way of SEND training that's kind of coming up, although there is a budgetary change there, so that might be a real positive. But in terms of reducing the staff to sort of pay those bills means that these sort of bespoke solutions will become, I guess, a little bit trickier to do. So like I'm going to wrap the show up there, and then I'll pester you mercilessly via LinkedIn and see if you want to do a part 2 in the future.
Yeah, of course.
Where I'd love to kind of go on to, and Huma agrees. She said, "Brilliant discussion. We need a part 2." So thank you very much. I'll
thank you so much. Thank you.
So the time leaves us though just for one really quick fire round where I really do put the pressure on you. It's the most frightening part of the show. It's left guests quivering like jelly. It's left a few in tears. So the aim of the game is our quickfire quiz for you to answer as many questions as possible in the space of 1 minute. Your answers are to be as short as you possibly can.
That's a challenge.
Some of them will be education related, some of them will not be. Are you ready?
I'll do my best. Hit me.
And this is just what you need after such a long day.
Yes,
okay, here we go.
So Andy, one word that sums up approaches to discipline in schools.
Sorry, say that again. You cut off slightly.
One word that sums up, I'll give you extra time, don't worry. One word that sums up approaches to discipline in schools.
Consistency.
Consistency. Coffee or tea to survive the day?
Oh, coffee.
What is one thing you wish that parents knew?
If they're alive, if they're not in prison and they still like you, you're doing amazing. And even 1 out of those 3 is still absolutely brilliant.
Okay, my kids aren't in prison. That's good. If you had to teach a subject in school tomorrow, what would terrify you the most?
Oh, art. I'm awful at it.
Art. Oh, yeah. Now, what's one thing you wish young people knew?
One thing I wish young people knew. Oh, that's big. There's so much. That every decision you make will be the right one. I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. I believe that you can make a reason from everything that happens. And you can make every decision you make a good one.
Even with extra time, I have to stop you there. Andy, I just want to say thank you so much. Just a shout out for Teachers Talk Connect. It's back, our annual CPD and networking extravaganza. Join the TTR team on Saturday, the 14th of March in Manchester. Tickets are free, so what are you waiting for? Please do head over to ttrradio.org/connect 2026. Don't forget to download, like, comment, and interact with what we've been doing for the show. And with your support, we do believe that teachers have a voice in education. You have been listening to The Late Show with Tim Smell on Teachers Talk Radio. I would like to send out a massive thank you to my guest, Andy Baker. It's been such a privilege to have you on and to touch into your expertise. I'm so grateful for the time. I'm Tim Smell. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time.
Outstanding and world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.